Section 21 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Section 21. Chapter 18, Part 1. A Mount of Vision. Henry Vaughan. We have now arrived at the borders of a long, dreary tract, which, happily for my readers, I can shorten for them, in this my retrospect. From the heights of Henry Vaughan's verse, I look across a stony region, with a few feeble oases scattered over it, and a hazy green in the distance. It does not soften the dreariness that its stones are all laid in order, that the spaces which should be meadows are skilfully paved. Henry Vaughan belongs to the mystical school, but his poetry rules his theories. You find no more of the mystic than the poet can easily govern. In fact, scarcely more than is necessary to the highest poetry. With relation to his higher nature alone, it blossoms into poetry. His twin brother, Thomas, developed his mysticism downwards in the direction of the material sciences, a true effort still, but one in which the danger of ceasing to be true increases with the increasing ratio the further it is carried. They were both born in South Wales in the year 1621. Thomas was a clergyman, Henry a doctor of medicine. Both were royalists, and both suffered in the cause. Thomas by expulsion from his living, Henry by imprisonment. Thomas died soon after the Restoration. Henry outlived the Revolution. Henry Vaughan was by then nearly 30 years younger than George Herbert, whom he consciously and intentionally imitates. His art is not comparable to that of Herbert. Hence, Herbert remains the master. For it is not the thought that makes the poet, it is the utterance of that thought in worthy presence of speech. He is careless and somewhat rugged. If he can get his thought dressed, and thus made visible, he does not mind the dress fitting awkwardly, or even being a little out at the elbows. And yet he has grander lines and phrases than any in Herbert. He has occasionally a daring success that strikes one with astonishment. In a word, he says more splendid things than Herbert, though he writes inferior poems. His thought is profound and just. The harmonies in his soul are true. Its artistic and musical ear is defective. His movements are sometimes grand, sometimes awkward. Herbert is always gracious. I use the word as meaning much more than graceful. The following poem will instance Vaughan's fine mysticism and odd embodiment. Cock crowing. Father of lights! What sunny seed, what glance of day hast thou confined into this bird? To all the breed this busy ray thou hast assigned. Their magnetism works all night, and dreams of paradise and light. Their eyes watch for the morning hue, their little grain expelling night, so shines and sings as if it knew the path unto the house of light. It seems their candle, howe'er done, was tinned and lighted at the sun. If such a tincture, such a touch, so firm a longing can empower, shall thy own image think it much to watch for thy appearing hour? If a mere blast so fill the sail, shall not the breath of God prevail? O thou immortal light and heat, whose hand so shines through all this frame, that by the beauty of the seat we plainly see who made the same. Seeing thy seed abides in me, dwell thou in it, and I in thee. To sleep without thee is to die. Yea, 'tis a death partakes of hell, for where thou dost not close the eye, it never opens, I can tell. In such a dark Egyptian border, the shades of death dwell and disorder. Its joys and hopes and earnest throes, and hearts whose pulse beats still for light, are given to birds, who but thee knows a love-sick soul's exalted flight. Can souls be tracked by any eye but his who gave them wings to fly? Only this veil, which thou hast broke, and must be broken yet in me, this veil, I say, is all the cloak and cloud which shadows me from thee. This veil thy full-eyed love denies, and only gleams and fractions spies. Oh, take it off, make no delay, but brush me with thy light, that I may shine unto a perfect day, and warm me at thy glorious eye. Oh, take it off, or, till it flee, though with no lily, stay with me. I have no room for poems often quoted, therefore not for that lovely one beginning. They are all gone into the world of light. But I must not omit the retreat, for, besides its worth, I have another reason for presenting it. The retreat. Happy those early days when I shined in my angel infancy, before I understood this place appointed for my second race, or taught my soul to fancy aught but a white celestial thought, when yet I had not walked above a mile or two from my first love, and looking back at that short space could see a glimpse of his bright face, when on some gilded cloud or flower my gazing soul would dwell an hour, and in those weaker glories spy some shadows of eternity, before I taught my tongue to wound my conscience with a sinful sound, or had the black art to dispense a several sin to every sense, but felt through all this fleshly dress bright shoots of everlastingness. Oh, how I long to travel back, and tread again that ancient track, that I might once more reach that plain where first I left my glorious train, from whence the enlightened spirit sees that shady city of palm trees. But ah, my soul, with too much stay, is drunk and staggers in the way. Some men a forward motion love, but I by backward steps would move. And when this dust falls to the urn, in that state I came return. Let anyone who is well acquainted with Wordsworth's grand ode, that on the intimations of immortality, turn his mind to a comparison between that and this, he will find the resemblance remarkable. Whether the retreat suggested the form of the ode is not of much consequence, for the ode is the outcome at once and essence of all Wordsworth's theories, and whatever he may have drawn from the retreat is glorified in the ode. Still, it is interesting to compare them. Vaughan believes, with Wordsworth and some other great men, that this is not our first stage of existence, that we are haunted by dim memories of a former state. This belief is not necessary, however, to sympathize with the poem, for whether the present be our first life or no, we have come from God, and bring from him conscience and 1,000 godlike gifts. Happy those early days, Vaughan begins. There was a time, begins Wordsworth, when the earth seemed apparelled in celestial light. Before I understood this place, continues Vaughan, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized, says Wordsworth. A white celestial thought, says Vaughan. Heaven lies about us in our infancy, says Wordsworth. A mile or two off I could see his face, says Vaughan. Trailing clouds of glory do we come, says Wordsworth. On some gilded cloud or flower my gazing soul would dwell an hour, says Vaughan. The hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, says Wordsworth. Wordsworth's poem is the profounder in its philosophy, as well as far the grander and lovelier in its poetry. But in the moral relation, Vaughan's poem is the more definite of the two, and gives us, in its close, poor as that is, compared with the rest of it, just what we feel is wanting in Wordsworth's, the hope of return to the bliss of childhood. We may be comforted for what we lose by what we gain, but that is not a recompense large enough to be divine. We want both. Vaughan will be a child again. For the movements of man's life are in spirals. We go back whence we came, ever returning on our former traces, only upon a higher level, on the next upward coil of the spiral, so that it is a going back and a going forward, ever and both at once. Life is, as it were, a constant repentance, or thinking of it again. The childhood of the kingdom takes the place of the childhood of the brain, but comprises all that was lovely in the former delight. The heavenly children will subdue the kingdoms, work righteousness, wax valiant in fight, rout the armies of the aliens, merry of the heart, as when in the nursery of this world they fought their fancied frigates and defended their toy battlements. Here are the beginning and end of another of similar purport. Childhood. I cannot reach it, and my striving eye dazzles at it, as at eternity. Were now that chronicle alive, those white designs which children drive, and the thoughts of each harmless hour, with their content too, in my power. Quickly would I make my path even, and by mere playing go to heaven. An age of mysteries, which he must live twice that would God's face see, which angels guard and with it play, angels which foul men drive away. How do I study now, and scan thee more than e'er I studied man, and only see, through a long night, thy edges and thy bordering light? Oh, for thy centre and mid-day! For sure that is the narrow way. Many a true thought comes out by the help of a fancy or half-playful exercise of the thinking power. There is a good deal of such fancy in the following poem, but in the end it rises to the height of the purest and best mysticism. We must not forget that the deepest man can utter will be but the type or symbol of a something deeper yet, of which he can perceive only a doubtful glimmer. This will serve for general remark upon the mystical mode, as well as for comment explanatory of the close of the poem. The night, John chapter 3, verse 2. Through that pure, virgin shrine, that sacred veil, drawn o'er thy glorious noon, that men might look and live, as glowworms shine and face the moon, wise Nicodemus saw such light as made him know his God by night. Most blessed believer he, who in that land of darkness and blind eyes thy long-expected healing wings could see when thou didst rise, and, what can never more be done, did at midnight speak with the sun. Oh, who will tell me where he found thee at that dead and silent hour? What hallowed solitary ground did bear so rare a flower? Within whose sacred leaves did lie the fullness of the deity? No mercy seat of gold, no dead and dusty cherub, nor carved stone, but his own living works did my Lord hold and lodge alone, where trees and herbs did watch and peep and wonder, while the Jews did sleep. Dear night, this world's defeat, the stop to busy fools, care's check and curb, the day of spirits, my soul's calm retreat, which none disturb. Christ's progress, and his prayer time, the hours to which high heaven doth chime, God's silent, searching flight, when my Lord's head is filled with dew, and all his locks are wet with the clear drops of night, his still soft call, his knocking time, the soul's dumb watch, when spirits their fair kindred catch. Were all my loud, evil days calm and unhaunted, as is thy dark tent, whose peace, but by some angel's wing or voice, is seldom rent, then I in heaven all the year long would keep, and never wander here. But living where the sun doth all things wake, and where all mix and tire themselves and others, I consent and run to every mire, and by this world's ill guiding light err more than I can do by night. There is in God, some say, a deep but dazzling darkness, as men here say it is late and dusky, because they see not all clear. Oh, for that night, where I in him might live, invisible and dim! This is glorious, and its lesson of quiet and retirement we need more than ever in these hurried days upon which we have fallen. If men would but be still enough in themselves to hear, through all the noises of the busy light, the voice that is ever talking on in the dusky chambers of their hearts. Look at his love for nature, too, and read the 4th stanza in connection with my previous remarks upon symbolism. I think this poem grander than any of George Herbert's. I use the word with intended precision. Here is one, the end of which is not so good, poetically considered, as the magnificent beginning, but which contains striking lines throughout. The Dawning. Ah, what time wilt thou come? When shall that cry, "The bridegroom's coming," fill the sky? Shall it in the evening run, when our words and works are done? Or will thy all-surprising light break at midnight, when either sleep or some dark pleasure possesses mad man without measure? Or shall these early, fragrant hours unlock thy bowers, and with their blush of light descry thy locks crowned with eternity? Indeed, it is the only time that with thy glory doth best chime. All now are stirring, every field full hymns doth yield, the whole creation shakes off night, and for thy shadow looks the light. Stars now vanish without number, sleepy planets set and slumber, the pursy clouds disband and scatter, all expect some sudden matter. Not one beam triumphs, but from far, that morning star. Oh, at what time soever thou, unknown to us, the heavens will bow, and with thy angels in the van descend to judge poor, careless man. Grant I may not, like puddle, lie in a corrupt security, where if a traveller water crave, he finds it dead and in a grave. But as this restless vocal spring all day and night doth run and sing, and though here born, yet is acquainted elsewhere, and, flowing, keeps untainted, so let me all my busy age in thy free services engage. And though, while here, of force, I must have commerce sometimes with poor dust, and in my flesh, though vile and low, as this doth in her channel flow, yet let my course, my aim, my love, and chief acquaintance be above. So, when that day and hour shall come, in which thyself will be the sun, thou'lt find me dressed and on my way, watching the break of thy great day. I do not think that description of the dawn has ever been surpassed. The verse, all expect some sudden matter, is wondrously fine. The water dead and in a grave, because stagnant, is a true fancy, and the acquainted elsewhere of the running stream is a masterly phrase. I need not point out the symbolism of the poem. I do not know a writer, Wordsworth not excepted, who reveals more delight in the visions of nature than Henry Vaughan. He is a true forerunner of Wordsworth, inasmuch as the latter sets forth, with only greater profundity and more art than he, the relations between nature and human nature, while, on the other hand, he is the forerunner as well of someone that must yet do what Wordsworth has left almost unattempted, namely, set forth the sympathy of nature with the aspirations of the spirit that is born of God, born again, I mean, in the recognition of the child's relation to the Father. Both Herbert and Vaughan have thus read nature, the latter turning many leaves which few besides have turned. In this he has struck upon a deeper and richer lode than even Wordsworth, though he has not wrought it with half his skill. In any history of the development of the love of the present age for nature, Vaughan, although I fear his influence would be found to have been small as yet, must be represented as the phosphor of coming dawn. Beside him, Thomson is cold, artistic, and grey. Though larger in scope, he is not to be compared with him in sympathetic sight. It is this insight that makes Vaughan a mystic. He can see one thing everywhere, and all things the same, yet each with 1,000 sides that radiate crossing lights, even as the airy particles around us. For him everything is the expression of, and points back to, some fact in the divine thought. Along the line of every ray he looks towards its radiating centre, the heart of the Maker. I could give many instances of Vaughan's power in reading the heart of nature, but I may not dwell upon this phase. Almost all the poems I give, and have given, will afford such. A nameless poem. I walked the other day, to spend my hour, into a field, where I sometimes had seen the soil to yield a gallant flower. But winter now had ruffled all the bower and curious store I knew there heretofore. Yet I, whose search loved not to peep and peer in the face of things, thought with myself there might be other springs besides this here, which, like cold friends, sees us but once a year, and so the flower might have some other bower. Then taking up what I could nearest spy, I digged about that place where I had seen him to grow out, and by I saw the warm recluse alone to lie, where fresh and green he lived of us unseen. Many a question, intricate and rare, did I there strow, but all I could extort was, that he now did there repair such losses as befell him in this air, and would ere long come forth most fair and young. This past, I threw the clothes quite o'er his head, and, stung with fear of my own frailty, dropped down many a tear upon his bed. Then, sighing, whispered, "Happy are the dead. What peace doth now rock him asleep below?" And yet, how few believe such doctrine springs from a poor root which all the winter sleeps here under foot, and hath no wings to raise it to the truth and light of things, but is still trod by every wandering clod. O thou, whose spirit did at first inflame and warm the dead, and by a sacred incubation fed with life this frame, which once had neither being, form, nor name, grant I may so thy steps track here below, that in these masks and shadows I may see thy sacred way, and by those hid ascents climb to that day which breaks from thee, who art in all things, though invisibly. Show me thy peace, thy mercy, love, and ease. And from this care, where dreams and sorrows reign, lead me above, where light, joy, leisure, and true comforts move without all pain. There, hid in thee, show me his life again, at whose dumb urn thus all the year I mourn. There are several amongst his poems lamenting, like this, the death of some dear friend, perhaps his twin brother, whom he outlived 30 years. According to what a man is capable of seeing in nature, he becomes either a man of appliance, a man of science, a mystic, or a poet. End of section 21. Section 22 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Section 22, Chapter 18, Part 2. I must now give two that are simple in thought, construction, and music. The latter ought to be popular, from the nature of its rhythmic movement and the holy merriment it carries. But in the former, note how the major key of gladness changes in the third stanza to the minor key of aspiration, which has always some sadness in it, a sadness which deepens to grief in the next stanza, at the consciousness of unfitness for Christ's company, but is lifted by hope almost again to gladness in the last. Christ's Nativity. Awake, glad heart, get up and sing. It is the birthday of thy King. Awake, awake! The sun doth shake light from his locks, and all the way breathing perfumes doth spice the day. Awake, awake! Hark how the wood rings, winds whisper, and the busy springs a concert make. Awake, awake! Man is their high priest, and should rise to offer up the sacrifice. I would I were some bird or star, fluttering in the woods, or lifted far above this inn and road of sin. Then either star or bird should be shining or singing still to thee. I would I had in my best part fit rooms for thee, or that my heart were so clean as thy manger was. But I am all filth and obscene. Yet, if thou wilt, thou canst make clean. Sweet Jesu, will then, let no more this leper haunt and soil thy door. Cure him, ease him, oh, release him, and let once more, by mystic birth, the Lord of life be born in earth. The fitting companion to this is his Easter hymn. Death and darkness, get you packing. Nothing now to man is lacking. All your triumphs now are ended, and what Adam marred is mended. Graves are beds now for the weary, death a nap, to wake more merry. Youth now, full of pious duty, seeks in thee for perfect beauty. The weak and aged, tired with length of days, from thee look with new strength, and infants with thy pangs contest, as pleasant as if with the breast. Then unto him who hath thus thrown, even to contempt, thy kingdom down, and by his blood did us advance unto his own inheritance. To him be glory, power, and praise, from this unto the last of days. We must now descend from this height of true utterance into the valley of humiliation, and cannot do better than console ourselves by listening to the boy in mean clothes, of the fresh and well-favoured countenance, whom Christiana and her fellow pilgrims hear singing in that valley. He that is down needs fear no fall. He that is low, no pride. He that is humble ever shall have God to be his guide. I am content with what I have, little be it or much, and, Lord, contentment still I crave, because thou savest such. Fullness to such a burden is that go on pilgrimage. Here little, and hereafter bliss, is best from age to age. I could not have my book without one word in it of John Bunyan, the tinker, probably the gypsy, who, although born only, and not made, a poet, like his great brother John Milton, has uttered in prose a wealth of poetic thought. He was born in 1628, 20 years after Milton. I must not, however, remark on this noble Bohemian of literature and prophecy, but leaving at length these flowery hills and meadows behind me, step on my way across the desert. England had now fallen under the influence of France instead of Italy, and that influence has never been for good, to our literature at least. Thence its chief aim grew to be a desirable trimness of speech and logical arrangement of matter. Good external qualities, purchased at a fearful price with the loss of all that makes poetry precious. The poets of England, with John Dryden at their head, ceased almost for a time to deal with the truths of humanity, and gave themselves to the facts and relations of society. The nation which could recall the family of the Stuarts must necessarily fall into such a decay of spiritual life as should render its literature only respectable at best, and its religious utterances essentially vulgar. But the decay is gradual. Bishop Ken, born in 1637, is known chiefly by his hymns for the morning and evening, deservedly popular. He has, however, written a great many besides, too many, indeed, for variety or excellence. He seems to have set himself to write them as acts of worship. They present many signs of a perversion of taste, which, though not in them so remarkable, rose to a height before long. He annoys us, besides, by the constant recurrence of certain phrases, one or two of which are not admirable, and by using, in the midst of a simple style, odd Latin words. Here are portions of, I think, one of his best, and good it is. First Sunday after Christmas. Lord, 'tis thyself, who hast impressed in native light on human breast, that their Creator all mankind should Father call. A father's love all mortals know, and the love filial which they owe. Our Father gives us heavenly light, and to be happy, ghostly sight. He blesses, guides, sustains, he eases us in pains. Abatements for our weakness makes, and never a true child forsakes. He waits till the hard heart relents, our self-damnation he laments. He sweetly them invites to share in heaven's delights. His arms he opens to receive all who for past transgressions grieve. My Father, oh, that name is sweet to sinners mourning in retreat. God's heart paternal yearns when he a change discerns. He to his favor them restores. He heals their most inveterate sores. Religious honor, humble awe, obedience to our Father's law, a lively grateful sense of tenderness immense, full trust on God's paternal care, submission which chastisement bears, grief when his goodness we offend, zeal to his likeness to ascend, will from the world refined to his sole will resigned. These graces in God's children shine, reflections of the love divine. God's Son co-equal taught us all, in prayer his Father ours to call. With confidence in need we to our Father speed, of his own Son the language dear, intenerates the Father's ear. Thou, Father, art, though to my shame I often forfeit that dear name. But since for sin I grieve, me father-like receive. O melt me into filial tears, to pay of love my vast arrears. O spirit of adoption, spread thy wings enamoring o'er my head. O filial love immense, raise me to love intense. O Father, source of love divine, my powers to love and him incline. While God my Father I revere, nor all hell powers nor death I fear. I am my Father's care, his succours present are. All comes from my loved Father's will, and that sweet name intends no ill. God's Son his soul, when life he closed, in his dear Father's hands reposed. I'll, when my last I breathe, my soul to God bequeath, and panting for the joys on high, invoking love paternal, die. Born in 1657, one of the later English Platonists, John Norris, who, with how many incumbents between I do not know, succeeded George Herbert in The Cure of Bemerton, has left a few poems, which would have been better if he had not been possessed with the common admiration for the rough-shod rhythms of Abraham Cowley. Here is one in which the peculiarities of his theories show themselves very prominently. There is a constant tendency in such to wander into the region half spiritual, half material. The Aspiration. How long, great God, how long must I, immured in this dark prison, lie? My soul must watch to have intelligence, where at the grates and avenues of sense, where but faint gleams of thee salute my sight, like doubtful moonshine in a cloudy night. When shall I leave this magic sphere, and be all mind, all eye, all ear? How cold this clime, and yet my sense perceives even here thy influence. Even here thy strong magnetic charms I feel, and pant and tremble like the amorous steel. To lower good and beauties less divine, sometimes my erroneous needle does decline. But yet, so strong the sympathy, it turns and points again to thee. I long to see this excellence, which at such distance strikes my sense. My impatient soul struggles to disengage her wings from the confinement of her cage. Wouldst thou, great love, this prisoner once set free, how would she hasten to be linked to thee? She'd for no angel's conduct stay, but fly, and love on all the way. The Return. Dear contemplation, my divinest joy, when I thy sacred mount ascend, what heavenly sweets my soul employ! Why can't I there my days forever spend? When I have conquered thy steep heights with pain, what pity 'tis that I must down again! And yet I must. My passions would rebel, should I too long continue here. No, here I must not think to dwell, but mind the duties of my proper sphere. So angels, though they heaven's glories know, forget not to attend their charge below. The old hermits thought to overcome their impulses. Our Platonist has discovered for himself that the world of duty is the only sphere in which they can be combated. Never perhaps is a saint more in danger of giving way to impulse, let it be anger or what it may, than in the moment when he has just ascended from this mount of contemplation. We find ourselves now in the zone of hymn writing. From this period, that is, from towards the close of the 17th century, a large amount of the fervour of the country finds vent in hymns. They are innumerable. With them the scope of my book would not permit me to deal, even had I inclination thitherward, and knowledge enough to undertake their history. but I am not, therefore, precluded from presenting any hymn whose literary excellence makes it worthy. It is with special pleasure that I refer to a little book which was once a household treasure in a multitude of families, the Spiritual Songs of John Mason, a clergyman in the county of Buckingham. The date of his birth does not appear to be known, but the first edition of these songs was published in 1683. Dr. Watts was very fond of them. Would that he had written with similar modesty of style! A few of them are still popular in congregational singing. Here is the first in the book, a general song of praise to Almighty God. How shall I sing that majesty which angels do admire? Let dust in dust and silence lie. Sing, sing, ye heavenly choir. Thousands of thousands stand around thy throne, O God most high. 10,000 times 10,000 sound thy praise, but who am I? Thy brightness unto them appears, whilst I thy footsteps trace. A sound of God comes to my ears, but they behold thy face. They sing because thou art their Son. Lord, send a beam on me. For where heaven is but once begun, there hallelujahs be. Enlighten with faith's light my heart, inflame it with love's fire. Then I shall sing and bear a part with that celestial choir. I shall, I fear, be dark and cold, with all my fire and light. Yet when thou dost accept their gold, Lord, treasure up my might. How great a being, Lord, is thine, which doth all beings keep. Thy knowledge is the only line to sound so vast a deep. Thou art a sea without a shore, a sun without a sphere. Thy time is now and evermore. Thy place is everywhere. How good art thou, whose goodness is our parent, nurse, and guide, whose streams do water paradise, and all the earth beside. Thine upper and thy nether springs make both thy worlds to thrive. Under thy warm and sheltering wings thou keepest two broods alive. Thy arm of might, most mighty King, both rocks and hearts doth break. My God, thou canst do everything, but what should show thee weak? Thou canst not cross thyself, or be less than thyself, or poor. But whatsoever pleaseth thee, that canst thou do, and more. Who would not fear thy searching eye, witness to all that's true? Dark hell and deep hypocrisy lie plain before its view. Motions and thoughts, before they grow, thy knowledge doth espy. What unborn ages are to do is done before thine eye. Thy wisdom, which both makes and mends, we ever much admire. Creation all our wit transcends. Redemption rises higher. Thy wisdom guides strayed sinners home. 'Twill make the dead world rise, and bring those prisoners to their doom. Its paths are mysteries. Great is thy truth, and shall prevail, to unbelievers' shame. Thy truth and years do never fail. Thou ever art the same. Unbelief is a raging wave, dashing against a rock. If God doth not his Israel save, then let Egyptians mock. Most pure and holy are thine eyes, most holy is thy name. Thy saints and laws and penalties thy holiness proclaim. This is the devil's scourge and sting. This is the angel's song, who holy, holy, holy sing in heavenly Canaan's tongue. Mercy, that shining attribute, the sinner's hope and plea, huge hosts of sins in their pursuit are drowned in thy Red Sea. Mercy is God's memorial, and in all ages praised. My God, thine only Son did fall, that mercy might be raised. Thy bright back parts, O God of grace, I humbly here adore. Show me thy glory and thy face, that I may praise thee more. Since none can see thy face and live, for me to die is best. Through Jordan's streams who would not dive, to land at Canaan's rest. To these songs of praise is appended another series called Penitential Cries by the Reverend Thomas Shepherd, who, for a short time, a clergyman at Buckinghamshire, became the minister of the Congregational Church at Northampton, afterwards under the care of Doddridge. Although he was an imitator of Mason, some of his hymns are admirable. The following I think one of the best. For Communion with God. Alas, my God, that we should be such strangers to each other. Oh, that as friends we might agree, and walk and talk together. Thou knowest my soul does dearly love the place of thine abode. No music drops so sweet a sound as these two words, my God. May I taste that communion, Lord, thy people have with thee? Thy spirit daily talks with them. Oh, let it talk with me. Like Enoch, let me walk with God, and thus walk out my day, attended with the heavenly guards upon the King's highway. When wilt thou come unto me, Lord? O come, my Lord, most dear. Come near, come nearer, nearer still. I'm well when thou art near. When wilt thou come unto me, Lord? For till thou dost appear, I count each moment for a day, each minute for a year. There's no such thing as pleasure here. My Jesus is my all. As thou dost shine or disappear, my pleasures rise and fall. Come, spread thy savour on my frame. No sweetness is so sweet, till I get up to sing thy name, where all thy singers meet. In the writings of both, we recognize a straightforwardness of expression equal to that of Wither, and a quaint simplicity of thought and form like that of Herrick, while the very charm of some of the best lines is their spontaneity. The men have just enough mysticism to afford them homeliest figures for deepest feelings. I turn to the accomplished Joseph Addison. He was born in 1672. His religious poems are so well known, and are, for the greater part, so ordinary, in everything but their simplicity of composition, that I should hardly have cared to choose one, had it not been that we owe him much gratitude for what he did in the reigns of Anne and George I to purify the moral taste of the English people, at a time when the influence of the clergy was not for elevation, and to teach the love of a higher literature when Milton was little known and less esteemed. Especially are we indebted to him for his modest and admirable criticism of the Paradise Lost in The Spectator. Of those few poems to which I have referred, I choose the best known because it is the best. It has to me a charm for which I can hardly account. Yet I imagine I see in it a sign of the poetic times, a flatness of spirit arising from the evanescement of the mystical element, begins to result in a worship of power. Neither power nor wisdom, though infinite both, could constitute a God worthy of the worship of a human soul, and the worship of such a God must sink to the level of that fancied divinity. Small wonder is it, then, that the lyric should now droop its wings and moult the feathers of its praise. I do not say that God's more glorious attributes are already forgotten, but that the tendency of the Christian lyric is now to laudation of power, and knowledge, a form of the same, as the essential of Godhead. This indicates no recalling of metaphysical questions, such as we have met in foregoing verse, but a decline towards system. A rising passion, if anything so cold may be called a passion, for the reduction of all things to the forms of the understanding, a declension which has prepared the way for the present worship of science, and its refusal, if not denial, of all that cannot be proved in forms of the intellect. The hymn which has led to these remarks is still good, although, like the loveliness of the red and lowering west, it gives sign of a grey and cheerless dawn, under whose dreariness the child will first doubt if his father loves him, and next doubt if he has a father at all, and is not a mere foundling that nature has lifted from her path. The spacious firmament on high, with all the blue ethereal sky, and spangled heavens a shining frame, their great original proclaim. The unwearied sun from day to day does his Creator's power display, and publishes to every land the work of an almighty hand. Soon as the evening shades prevail, the moon takes up the wondrous tale, and nightly to the listening earth repeats the story of her birth, whilst all the stars that round her burn, and all the planets in their turn, confirm the tidings as they roll, and spread the truth from pole to pole. What though in solemn silence all move round the dark terrestrial ball? What though no real voice nor sound amidst their radiant orbs be found? In reason's ear they all rejoice, and utter forth a glorious voice, forever singing as they shine, "The hand that made us is divine." The very use of the words spangled and frame seems, to my fancy only it may be, to indicate a tendency toward the unworthy and theatrical. Yet the second stanza is lovely beyond a doubt, and the whole is most artistic, though after a tame fashion. Whether indeed the heavenly bodies teach what he says, or whether we should read divinity, worthy of the name, in them at all, without the human revelation which healed men, I doubt much. That divinity is there, yes. That we could read it there without having seen the face of the Son of Man first, I think no. I do not, therefore, dare imagine that no revelation dimly leading towards such result glimmered in the hearts of God's chosen amongst Jews and Gentiles before he came. What I say is, that power and order, although of God, and preparing the way for him, are not his revealers unto men. No doubt King David compares the perfection of God's law to the glory of the heavens, but he did not learn that perfection from the heavens, but from the law itself, revealed in his own heart through the life-teaching of God. When he had learned it, he saw that the heavens were like it. To unveil God, only manhood like our own will serve, and he has taken the form of man, that he might reveal the manhood in him from awful eternity. End of section 22. Recording by Owlivia.
Section 23 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kristen Hand. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Chapter 19. The Plain. But Addison's tameness is wonderfully lovely beside the fervours of a man of honoured name, Dr. Isaac Watts, born in 1674. The result must be dreadful where fervour will poetize without the aidful restraints of art and modesty. If any man would look upon absurdity in the garb of sobriety, let him search Dryden's Annus Mirabilis. Dr. Watts' lyrics are as bad. They are fantastic to utter folly. In admiration of, quote, the incomparable Mr. Crowley, end quote, did the sense of them more injury than the imitation of his rough cantering ode could do their rhythm. The sentimentalities of Roman Catholic writers towards our Lord and his mother are not half so offensive as the courtier-like flatteries Dr. Watts offers to the Most High. To say nothing of the irreverence, the vulgarity is offensive. he affords another instance amongst thousands how little the form in which feeling is expressed has to do with the feeling itself. To him the thought is true, the form of its utterance false, the feeling lovely, the word often to a degree repulsive. The ugly web is crossed now and then by a fine line, and even damasked with an occasional good poem. I have found 2, and only 2, in the whole of his 75 lyrics sacred to devotion. His objectivity and boldness of thought, and his freedom of utterance, cause us ever and anon to lament that he had not the humility and faith of an artist as well as of a Christian. Almost all his symbols indicate a worship of power and of outward show. I give the best of the 2 good poems I have mentioned, and very good it is. Happy Frailty. How meanly dwells the immortal mind, how vile these bodies are! Why was a clod of earth designed to enclose a heavenly star? Weak cottage where our souls reside, this flesh a tottering wall. With frightful breaches gaping wide, the building bends to fall. All round it storms of trouble blow, and waves of sorrow roll. Cold waves and winter storms beat through, and pain the tenant soul. Alas, how frail our state, said I, and thus went mourning on, till sudden from the cleaving sky a gleam of glory shone. My soul all felt the glory come, and breathed her native air. Then she remembered heaven her home, and she a prisoner here. Straight she began to change her key, and joyful in her pains, she sang the frailty of her clay in pleasurable strains. How weak the prison is where I dwell, flesh but a tottering wall. The breaches cheerfully foretell the house must shortly fall. No more, my friends, shall I complain, though all my heartstrings ache. Welcome disease and every pain that makes the cottage shake. Now let the tempest blow all round, now swell the surges high, and beat this house of bondage down to let the stranger fly. I have a mansion built above by the eternal hand, and should the earth's old basis move, my heavenly house must stand. Yes, for 'tis there my Saviour reigns. I long to see the God, and his immortal strength sustains the courts that cost him blood. Hark, from on high my Saviour calls, I come, my Lord, my love. Devotion breaks the prison walls, and speeds my last remove. His psalms and hymns are immeasurably better than his lyrics. Dreadful some of them are, and I doubt if there is one from which we would not wish stanzas, lines, and words absent. But some are very fine. The man who could write such verses as these ought not to have written as he has written. Had I a glance of thee, my God, kingdoms and men would vanish soon, vanish as though I saw them not, as a dim candle dies at noon. Then they might fight and rage and rave, I should perceive the noise no more than we can hear a shaking leaf, while rattling thunders round us roar. Some of his hymns will be sung, I fancy, so long as men praise God together. For most heartily do I grant that of all hymns I know he has produced the best for public use. But these bear a very small proportion indeed to the mass of his labor. We cannot help wishing that he had written about the 20th part. We could not have too much of his best, such as this. Be earth with all her scenes withdrawn, let noise and vanity be gone. In secret silence of the mind, my heaven, and there my God I find. But there is no occasion for the best to be so plentiful. A little of it will go a great way. And as our best moments are so few, how could any man write 600 religious poems and produce quality in proportion to quantity, save in an inverse ratio? Dr. Thomas Parnell, the well-known poet, a clergyman, born in Dublin in 1679, has written a few religious verses. The following have a certain touch of imagination and consequent grace, which distinguishes them above the swampy level of the time. Hymn for Evening. The beam-repelling mists arise, and evening spreads obscurer skies. The twilight will the night forerun, and night itself be soon begun. Upon thy knees devoutly bow, and pray the Lord of glory now to fill thy breast, or deadly sin may cause a blinder night within. And weather-pleasing vapors rise, which gently dim the closing eyes, which make the weary members blessed with sweet refreshment in their rest. Or whether spirits, footnote, the animal spirits of the old physiologists, end footnote, in the brain dispel their soft embrace again, and on my watchful bed I stay, forsook by sleep and waiting day. Be God forever in my view, and never he forsake me too, but still as day concludes in night, to break again with newborn light, his wondrous bounty let me find, with still a more enlightened mind. Thou hast a palace far above the moon and every star, thou that sittest on a throne to which the night was never known, regard my voice and make me blessed by kindly granting its request. If thoughts on thee my soul employ, my darkness will afford me joy, till thou shalt call and I shall soar, and part with darkness evermore. Many long and elaborate religious poems I have not even mentioned, because I cannot favor extracts, especially in heroic couplets or blank verse. They would only make my book heavy and destroy the song idea. I must here pass by one of the best such poems, The Complaint, or Night Thoughts, of Dr. Young, nor is there anything else of his I care to quote. I must give just one poem of Pope, born in 1688, the year of the Revolution. The flamboyant style of his Messiah is to me detestable. Nothing can be more unlike the simplicity of Christianity. After all, equally with those by whatever hand that would be religious by being miserable, I reject at once, along with all that are merely commonplace religious exercises. But this at least is very unlike the rest of Pope's compositions. It is as simple in utterance as it is large in scope and practical in bearing. The name Jove may be unpleasant to some ears. It is to mine, not because it is the name given to their deity by men who had little outward revelation, but because of the associations which the wanton poets, not the good philosophers, have gathered about it. Here let it stand, as Pope meant it, for one of the names of the unknown God. The Universal Prayer. Father of all, in every age, in every clime adored, by saint, by savage, and by sage, Jehovah, Jove, or Lord. Thou first great cause, least understood, who all my sense confined, to know but this, that thou art good, and that myself am blind. Yet gave me in this dark estate to see the good from ill, and binding nature fast in fate, left free the human will. What conscience dictates to be done, or warns me not to do, this teach me more than hell to shun, that more than heaven pursue. What blessings thy free bounty gives, let me not cast away, for God is paid when man receives, to enjoy is to obey. Yet not to earth's contracted span thy goodness let me bound, or think thee Lord alone of man when 1,000 worlds are round. Let not this weak, unknowing hand presume thy bolts to throw, and deal damnation round the land, on each I judge thy foe. If I am right, thy grace impart still in the right to stay. If I am wrong, O teach my heart to find that better way. Save me alike from foolish pride or impious discontent, at aught thy wisdom has denied, or aught thy goodness lent. Teach me to feel another's woe, to hide the fault I see, that mercy I to others show, that mercy show to me. Mean though I am, not wholly so, since quickened by thy breath, O lead me wheresoe'er I go, through this day's life or death. This day be bread and peace my lot, all else beneath the sun. Thou knowest if best bestowed or not, and let thy will be done. To thee whose temple is all space, whose altar earth, sea, skies, one chorus let all being raise, all nature's incense rise. And now we come upon a strange little well in the desert. Few flowers indeed shine upon its brink, and it flows with a somewhat unmusical ripple. It is a well of the water of life notwithstanding, for its song tells of the love and truth which are the grand power of God. John Byrom, born in Manchester in the year 1691, a man whose strength of thought and perception of truth greatly surpassed his poetic gifts, yet delightful so entirely in the poetic form that he wrote much and chiefly in it. After leaving Cambridge, he gained his livelihood for some time by teaching a shorthand of his own invention, but was so distinguished as a man of learning generally that he was chosen an F.R.S. in 1723. Coming under the influence, probably through William Law, of the writings of Jacob Boehme, the marvelous shoemaker of Gorlitz in Silesia, who lived in the time of our Shakespeare, and heartily adopting many of his views, he has left us a number of religious poems which are seldom so sweet in music as they are profound in the metaphysics of religion. Here we have yet again a mystical thread running radiant athwart both warp and woof of our poetic web. The mystical thinker will ever be found the reviver of religious poetry, and although some of the seed had come from afar both in time and space, Byron's verse is of indigenous growth. Much of the thought of the present day will be found in his verses. Here is a specimen of his metrical argumentation. It is taken from a series of Meditations for Every Day in Passion Week. Wednesday. Christ satisfieth the justice of God by fulfilling all righteousness. Justice demandeth satisfaction, yes, and ought to have it where injustice is. But there is none in God. It cannot mean demand of justice where it has full reign. To dwell in man it rightfully demands, such as he came from his Creator's hands. Man had departed from a righteous state, which he at first must have, if God create. 'Tis therefore called God's righteousness, and must be satisfied by man's becoming just. Must exercise good vengeance upon men, till it regains its rights in them again. This was the justice for which Christ became, a man to satisfy its righteous claim, became Redeemer of the human race, that sin in them to justice might give place. To satisfy a just and righteous will is neither more nor less than to fulfill. Here are two stanzas of one of more mystical reflection. A penitential soliloquy. What though no object strike upon the sight? Thy sacred presence is an inward light. What though no sounds shall penetrate the ear? To listening thought the voice of truth is clear. Sincere devotion needs no outward shrine. The center of an humble soul is thine. There may I worship, and there mayest thou place thy seat of mercy and thy throne of grace. Yea, fix, if Christ my advocate appear, the dreadful tribunal of thy justice there. Let each vain thought, let each impure desire meet in thy wrath with a consuming fire. And here are two of more lyrical favor. The soul's tendency towards its true center. Stones towards the earth descend, rivers to the ocean roll. Every motion has some end. What is thine, beloved soul? Mine is where my Saviour is, there with him I hope to dwell. Jesu is the central bliss, love the force that doth impel. Truly thou hast answered right, now may heaven's attractive grace towards the source of thy delight speed along thy quickening pace. Thank thee for thy generous care, heaven that did the wish inspire, through thy instrumental prayer plumes the wings of my desire. Now methinks aloft I fly, now with angels bear a part. Glory be to God on high, peace to every Christian heart. The answer to the desponding soul. Cheer up, desponding soul, thy longing pleased I see. 'Tis part of that great whole wherewith I longed for thee. Wherewith I longed for thee, and left my Father's throne, from death to set thee free, to claim thee for my own. To claim thee for my own I suffered on the cross. Oh, were my love but known, no soul could fear its loss. No soul could fear its loss, but filled with love divine, would die on its own cross, and rise forever mine. Surely there is poetry as well as truth in this, but certainly in general his thought is far in excess of his poetry. Here are a few verses which I shall once more entitle Divine Epigrams. With peaceful mind thy race of duty run. God nothing does or suffers to be done, but what thou wouldst thyself, if thou couldst see, through all events of things as well as he. Think, and be careful what thou art within, for there is sin in the desire of sin. Think and be thankful in a different case, for there is grace in the desire of grace. An heated fancy or imagination may be mistaken for an inspiration. True, but is this conclusion fair to make, that inspiration must be all mistake? A pebble stone is not a diamond true, but must a diamond be a pebble too? To own a God who does not speak to men is first to own and then disown again. Of all idolatry the total sum is having gods that are both deaf and dumb. What is more tender than a mother's love to the sweet infant fondling in her arms? What arguments need her compassion move to hear its cries and help it in its harms? Now if the tenderest mother were possessed of all the love within her single breast, of all the mothers since the world began, 'tis nothing to the love of God to man. Faith, hope, and love were questioned what they thought of future glory which religion taught. Now faith believed it firmly to be true, and hope expected so to find it too. Love answered, smiling with a conscious glow, believe, expect, I know it to be so. End of section 23. Section 24 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kristen Hand. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Chapter 20. The Roots of the Hills. In the poems of James Thomson, we find two hymns to the God of creation, one in blank verse, the other in stanzas. They are of the kind which from him we should look for. The one in blank verse, which is as an epilogue to his great poem The Seasons, I prefer. We owe much to Thomson. Born in Scotland in the year 1700, he is the leading priest in a solemn procession to find God, not in the laws by which he has ordered his creation, but in the beauty which is the outcome of those laws. I do not say there is much of the relation of man to nature in his writing, but thitherward it tends. He is true about the outsides of God, and in Thomson we begin to feel that the revelation of God as meaning, and therefore being, the loveliness of nature, is about to be recognized. I do not say, to change my simile, that he is the first visible root in our literature whence we can follow the outburst of the flowers and foliage of our delight in nature. I could show 100 fibers leading from the depths of our old literature up to the great root. Nor is it surprising that with his age about him, he too should be found tending to magnify, not God's word, but his works, above all his name. We have beauty for loveliness, beneficence for tenderness. I have wondered whether one great part of Napoleon's mission was not to wake people from this idolatry of the power of God to the adoration of his love. The hymn holds a kind of middle place between the morning hymn in the 5th book of the Paradise Lost and the hymn in the Vale of Chamouni. It would be interesting and instructive to compare the three, but we have not time. Thomson has been influenced by Milton and Coleridge by both. We have delight in Milton, art in Thomson, heart, including both, in Coleridge. Hymn. These as they change, Almighty Father, these are but the varied God. The rolling year is full of thee. Forth in the pleasing spring thy beauty walks, thy tenderness and love. Wide flush the fields, the softening air is balm. Echo the mountains round, the forest smiles, and every sense and every heart is joy. Then comes thy glory in the summer months, with light and heat refulgent. Then thy sun shoots full perfection through the swelling year, and oft thy voice in dreadful thunder speaks, and oft at dawn, deep noon, or falling eve, by brooks and groves, in hollow whispering gales. Footnote. In the following 5 lines I have adopted the reading of the first edition, which, although a little florid, I prefer to the scanty 2 lines of the later. End footnote. A yellow floating pomp, thy bounty shines in autumn unconfined. Thrown from thy lap, profuse o'er nature, falls the lucid shower of beamy fruits, and in a radiant stream into the stores of sterile winter pours. In winter awful thou, with clouds and storms around thee thrown, tempest o'er tempest rolled, majestic darkness on the whirlwind's wing, riding sublime, thou bidst the world adore. Footnote. False in feeling, nor like God at all, although a ready pagan representation of him. There is much of the pagan left in many Christian poets too. End footnote. And humblest nature with thy northern blast. Mysterious round, what skill, what force divine, deep felt in these appear. A simple train, yet so delightful mixed with such kind art, such beauty and beneficence combined. Shade unperceived, so softening into shade, and also forming an harmonious whole, that as they still succeed, they ravish still. Nature attend, join every living soul beneath the spacious temple of the sky, in adoration join, and ardent raise one general song. To him, ye vocal gales, breathe soft whose spirit in your freshness breathes. Oh, talk of him in solitary glooms, where o'er the rock the scarcely waving pine fills the brown shade with a religious awe. And ye, whose bolder note is heard afar, who shake the astonished world, lift high to heaven the impetuous song, and say, from whom you rage, his praise, ye brooks, attune, ye trembling rills, and let me catch it as I muse along. Ye headlong torrents, rapid and profound, ye softer floods that lead the human maze along the vale, and thou, majestic main, a secret world of wonders in thyself, sound his stupendous praise, whose greater voice or bids you roar, or bids your roarings fall. Soft roll your incense, herbs, and fruits and flowers, in mingled clouds to him whose sun exalts, whose breath perfumes you, and whose pencil paints. Ye forests, bend, ye harvests, wave to him. Breathe your still song into the reaper's heart, as home he goes beneath the joyous moon. Bleat out afresh, ye hills, ye mossy rocks retain the sound, the broad responsive low, ye valleys raise, for the great shepherd reigns, and his unsuffering kingdom yet will come. Ye chief for whom the whole creation smiles, at once the head, the heart, and tongue of all, crown the great hymn. In swarming cities vast, assembled men to the deep organ join, the long resounding voice oft breaking clear, at solemn pauses through the swelling bass, and, as each mingling flame increases each, in one united ardor rise to heaven. Should fate command me to the farthest verge of the green earth, to distant barbarous climes, rivers unknown to song, where first the sun gilds Indian mountains, or his setting beam flames on the Atlantic isles, 'tis not to me, since God is ever present, ever felt, in the void waste as in the city full, and where he vital breathes, there must be joy. The worship of intellectual power in laws and inventions is the main delight of the song, not the living presence of creative love, which never sings its own praises, but spends itself in giving. Still, although there has passed away a glory from the world of song, although the fervor of childlike worship has vanished for a season, there are signs in these verses of a new dawn of devotion. Even the exclusive and therefore blind worship of science will, when it has turned the coil of the ascending spiral, result in a new song to, quote, him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters, end quote. But first, for a long time, the worship of power will go on. There is one sonnet by Kirke White, 85 years younger than Thomson, which is quite pagan in its mode of glorifying the power of the deity. But about the same time when Thomson's Seasons was published, which was in 1730, the third year of George II, that life which had burned on in the hidden corners of the church in spite of the worldliness and sensuality of its rulers, began to show a flame destined to enlarge and spread until it should have lighted up the mass with an outburst of Christian faith and hope. I refer to the movement called Methodism, in the midst of which, at an early stage of its history, arose the directing energies of John Wesley, a man sent of God to deepen at once and purify its motive influences. What he and his friends taught would, I presume, in its essence, amount mainly to this: that acquiescence in the doctrines of the Church is no fulfillment of duty, or anything indeed short of an obedient recognition of personal relation to God, who has sent every man the message of present salvation in his Son. A new life began to bud and blossom from the dry stem of the Church. The Spirit moved upon the waters of feeling, and the new undulation broke on the shores of thought in an outburst of new song. For while John Wesley roused the hearts of the people to sing, his brother Charles put songs in their mouths. I do not say that many of these songs possess much literary merit, but many of them are real lyrics. They have that essential element, song, in them. The following, however, is a very fine poem. That certain expressions in it may not seem offensive, it is necessary to keep the allegory of Jacob and the angel in full view, even better in view, perhaps, than the writer does himself. Wrestling Jacob. Come, O thou traveler unknown, whom I still hold but cannot see. My company before is gone, and I am left alone with thee. With thee all night I mean to stay, and wrestle till the break of day. I need not tell thee who I am, my misery or sin declare. Thyself hast called me by my name. Look on my hands, and read it there. But who, I ask thee, who art thou? Tell me thy name, and tell me now. In vain thou strugglest to get free. I never will unloose my hold. Art thou the man that died for me? The secret of thy love unfold. Wrestling, I will not let thee go, till I thy name, thy nature know. What though my sinking flesh complain, and murmur to contend so long? I rise, superior to my pain. When I am weak, then I am strong. And when my all of strength shall fail, I shall with the God-man prevail. My strength is gone, my nature dies, I sink beneath thy weighty hand. Faint to revive, and fall to rise. I fall, and yet by faith I stand. I stand and will not let thee go, till I thy name, thy nature know. Yield to me now, for I am weak, but confident in self-despair. Speak to my heart, in blessings speak. Be conquered by my instant prayer. Footnote: insisting, persistent. End footnote. Speak, or thou never hence shalt move, and tell me if thy name is love. 'Tis love, 'tis love, thou diedest for me. I hear thy whisper in my heart. The morning breaks, the shadows flee. Pure universal love thou art. To me, to all thy bowels move. Thy nature and thy name is love. My prayer hath power with God. The grace unspeakable I now receive. Through faith I see thee face to face. I see thee face to face and live. In vain I have not wept and strove. Thy nature and thy name is love. I know thee, Saviour, who thou art, Jesus, the feeble sinner's friend. Nor wilt thou with the night depart, but stay and love me to the end. Thy mercies never shall remove. Thy nature and thy name is love. Contented now upon my thigh, I halt till life's short journey end. All helplessness, all weakness I on thee alone for strength depend. Nor have I power from thee to move. Thy nature and thy name is love. Lame as I am, I take the prey. Hell, earth, and sin with ease o'ercome. I leap for joy, pursue my way, and as a bounding hart fly home. Through all eternity to prove. Thy nature and thy name is love. It seems to me that the art with which his very difficult end in the management of the allegory is reached is admirable. I have omitted 3 stanzas. I cannot give much from William Cowper. His poems, graceful always, and often devout even when playful, have amongst them that are expressly religious, while the best of his hymns are known to every reader of such. Born in 1731, he was greatly influenced by the narrow theology that prevailed in his circle, and most of his hymns are marred by the exclusiveness which belonged to the system and not to man. There is little of it in the following. Far from the world, O Lord, I flee, from strife and tumult far, from scenes where Satan wages still his most successful war. The calm retreat, the silent shade, with prayer and praise agree, and seem by thy sweet bounty made for those who follow thee. There if thy spirit touch the soul, and grace her mean abode, O with what peace and joy and love she communes with her God. There, like the nightingale, she pours her solitary lays, nor asks a witness of her song, nor thirsts for human praise. Author and guardian of my life, sweet source of light divine, and all harmonious names in one, my Saviour, thou art mine. What thanks I owe thee, and what love, a boundless, endless store, shall echo through the realms above, when time shall be no more. Sad as was Cowper's history, with the vapors of a low insanity, if not always filling his garden, yet ever brooding on the hilltops of his horizon, he was, through his faith in God, however darkened by the introversions of a neat, poverty-stricken theology, yet able to lead his life to the end. It is delightful to discover that when science, which is the anatomy of nature, had poisoned the theology of the country, in creating a demand for clean-cut theory in infinite affairs, the loveliness and truth of the countenance of living nature could calm the mind which this theology had irritated to the very borders of madness, and give a peace and hope which the man was altogether right in attributing to the Spirit of God. How many have been thus comforted who knew not, like Wordsworth, the immediate channel of their comfort, or even with Cowper recognized its source. God gives while men sleep. End of section 24. Section 25 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kristen Hand. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Chapter 21, The New Vision. William Blake, the painter of many strange and fantastic, but often powerful, sometimes very beautiful pictures, wrote poems of an equally remarkable kind. Some of them are as lovely as they are careless, while many present a curious contrast in the apparent incoherence of the simplest language. He was born in 1757, towards the close of the reign of George II. Possibly, if he had been sent to an age more capable of understanding him, his genius would not have been tempted to utter itself with such a wildness as appears to indicate hopeless indifference to being understood. We cannot tell sometimes whether to attribute the bewilderment the poems cause in us to a mysticism run wild, or to regard it as the reflex of madness in the writer. Here is a lyrical gem, however, although not cut with mathematical precision. Daybreak. To find the western path, right through the gates of wrath, I urge my way. Sweet morning leads me on, with soft repentant moan, I see the break of day. The war of swords and spears, melted by dewy tears, excels on high. The sun is freed from fears, and with soft, grateful tears ascends the sky. The following is full of truth, most quaintly expressed with a homeliness of phrase quite delicious. It is one of the Songs of Innocence, published, as we learn from Gilchrist's Life of Blake, in the year 1789. They were engraved on copper with illustrations by Blake, and printed and bound by his wife. When we consider them in respect of the time when they were produced, we find them marvelous for their originality and simplicity. On Another's Sorrow. Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief? Can I see a falling tear and not feel my sorrow's share? Can a father see his child weep, nor be with sorrow filled? Can a mother sit and hear an infant groan, an infant fear? No, no, never can it be, never, never can it be. And can he who smiles on all hear the wren with sorrows small, hear the small bird's grief and care, hear the woes that infants bear, and not sit beside the nest, pouring pity in their breast, and not sit the cradle near, weeping tear on infant's tear, and not sit both night and day, wiping all our tears away? Oh no, never can it be, never, never can it be. He doth give his joy to all, he becomes an infant small, he becomes a man of woe, he doth feel the sorrow too. Think not thou canst sigh a sigh, and thy Maker is not by. Think not thou canst weep a tear, and thy Maker is not near. Oh, he gives to us his joy, that our grief he may destroy. Till our grief is fled and gone, he doth sit by us and moan. There is our mystic yet again leading the way. A supreme regard for science and the worship of power go hand in hand. That knowledge is power has been esteemed the grandest incitement to study. Yet the antidote to the disproportionate cultivation of science is simply power in its crude form, breaking out, that is, as brute force. When science, isolated and glorified, has produced a contempt, not only for vulgar errors, but for the truths which are incapable of scientific proof, then, as we see in the French Revolution, the wild beast in man breaks from its den and chaos returns. But all the noblest minds in Europe look for grand things in the aurora of this uprising of the people. To the terrible disappointment that followed, we are indebted for the training of Wordsworth to the priesthood of nature's temple. So was he possessed with the hope of a coming deliverance for the nations that he spent many months in France during the Revolution. At length he was forced to seek safety at home. Dejected even to hopelessness for a time, he believed in nothing. How could there be a God that ruled in the earth when such a rising sun of promise was permitted to set in such a sea? But for man to worship himself is a far more terrible thing than that blood should flow like water. The righteous plague of God allowed things to go as they would for a time. But the power of God came upon Wordsworth. I cannot say as it had never come before, but with an added insight which made him recognize in the fresh gift all that he had known and felt of such in the past. To him, as to Cowper, the benignities of nature restored peace and calmness and hope, sufficient to enable him to look back and to gather wisdom. He was first troubled, then quieted, and then taught. Such presence of the Father has been an infinitely more active power in the redemption of men than men have yet become capable of perceiving. The divine expressions of nature, that is, the face of the Father therein visible, began to heal the plague which the worship of knowledge had bred. And the power of her teaching grew from comfort to prayer, as will be seen in the poem I shall give. Higher than all that nature can do in the way of direct lessoning is the production of such holy moods as result in hope, conscience of duty, and supplication. Those who have never felt it have to be told there is in her such a power, yielding to which the meek inherit the earth. Ninth Evening Voluntary, composed upon an evening of extraordinary splendor and beauty. 1. Had this effulgence disappeared with flying haste, I might have sent among the speechless clouds a look of blank astonishment. But 'tis endued with power to stay and sanctify one closing day, that frail mortality may see what is? Ah, no, but what can be. Time was when field and watery cove with modulated echoes rang, while choirs of fervent angels sang their vespers in the grove. Or crowning, star-like, each some sovereign height, warbled for heaven above and earth below, strains suitable to both, such holy rite. Methinks if audibly repeated now from hill or valley could not move sublimer transport, purer love, than doth this silent spectacle, the gleam, the shadow, and the peace supreme. 2. No sound is uttered, but a deep and solemn harmony pervades the hollow vale from steep to steep, and penetrates the glades. Far distant images draw nigh, called forth by wondrous potency of beamy radiance that imbues whate'er it strikes with gem-like hues. In vision exquisitely clear, herds range along the mountainside, and glistening antlers are descried, and gilded flocks appear. Thine is the tranquil hour, purpureal eve. But long as godlike wish or hope divine informs my spirit, ne'er can I believe that this magnificence is wholly thine. From worlds nor quickened by the sun, a portion of the gift is won. An intermingling of heaven's pomp is spread on ground which British shepherds tread. 3. And if there be whom broken ties afflict or injuries assail, yon hazy ridges to their eyes present a glorious scale. Footnote. Great cloudy ridges, one rising above the other like a grand stair up to the heavens. See Wordsworth's note. End footnote. Climbing suffused with sunny air to stop, no record hath told where, and tempting fancy to ascend, and with immortal spirits blend. Wings at my shoulders seem to play. But rooted here I stand and gaze on those bright steps that heavenward raise their practicable way. Come forth, ye drooping old men, look abroad, and see to what fair countries ye are bound. And if some traveller weary of his road hath slept since noontide on the grassy ground, ye genii to his covert speed, and wake him with such gentle heed as may attune his soul to meet the dower bestowed on this transcendent hour. 4. Such hues from their celestial urn were wont to stream before mine eye, where'er it wandered in the morn of blissful infancy. This glimpse of glory why renewed? Nay, rather speak with gratitude, for if a vestige of those gleams survived, 'twas only in my dreams. Dread power, whom peace and calmness serve, no less than nature's threatening voice, if aught unworthy be my choice, from thee if I would swerve, O let thy grace remind me of the light, full early lost and fruitlessly deplored, which at this moment on my waking sight appears to shine, by miracle restored. My soul, though yet confined to earth, rejoices in a second birth. 'Tis past, the visionary splendor fades, and night approaches with her shades. Although I have mentioned Wordsworth before Coleridge because he was 2 years older, yet Coleridge had much to do with the opening of Wordsworth's eyes to such visions, as indeed more than any man in our times. He has opened the eyes of the English people to see wonderful things. There is little of a directly religious kind in his poetry, yet we find in him what we miss in Wordsworth, an inclined plane from the revelation in nature to the culminating revelation in the Son of Man. Somehow, I say, perhaps because we find it in his prose, we feel more of this in Coleridge's verse. Coleridge is a sage, and Wordsworth is a seer, yet when the sage sees, that is, when, like the son of Beor, he falls into a trance having his eyes open, or when feeling and sight are one and philosophy is in abeyance, the ecstasy is even loftier in Coleridge than in Wordsworth. In their highest moods they seem almost to change places, Wordsworth to become sage and Coleridge seer. Perhaps the grandest hymn of praise which man, the mouthpiece of nature, utters for her, is the hymn of Mont Blanc. Hymn. Before sunrise in the vale of Chamonix. Hast thou a charm to stay the morning star in his steep course, so long he seems to pause? On thy bald, awful head, O sovereign Blanc, the Arve and the Arvieron at thy base rave ceaselessly, but thou, most awful form, risest from forth thy silent sea of pines, how silently! Around thee and above, deep is the air and dark, substantial black, an ebon mass. Methinks thou piercest it as with a wedge. But when I look again, it is thine own calm home, thy crystal shrine, thy habitation from eternity. O dread and silent mount! I gazed upon thee till thou, still present to the bodily sense, didst vanish from my thought. Entranced in prayer, I worshipped the invisible alone. Yet like some sweet beguiling melody, so sweet we know not we are listening to it, thou, the meanwhile, wast blending with my thought, yea, with my life and life's own secret joy, till the dilating soul, enwrapped, transfused, into the mighty vision passing, there as in her natural form swelled vast to heaven. Awake, my soul, not only passive praise thou owest, not alone these swelling tears, mute thanks and secret ecstasy. Awake, voice of sweet song, awake, my heart, awake. Green vales and icy cliffs all join my hymn. Thou first and chief, sole sovereign of the vale, the mountain, O struggling with the darkness all the night, and visited all night by troops of stars, these two lines are just the symbol for the life of their author, or when they climb the sky, or when they sink. Companion of the morning star at dawn, thyself earth's rosy star, and of the dawn, from the rose light on the snow of its peak, co-herald, wake, awake, and utter praise. Who sank thy sunless pillars deep in earth? Who filled thy countenance with rosy light? Who made thee parent of perpetual streams? And you, ye 5 wild torrents fiercely glad, who called you forth from night and utter death, from dark and icy caverns called you forth. They all flow from under the glaciers fed by their constant melting. Down those precipitous black jagged rocks, forever shattered and the same forever. Who gave you your invulnerable life, your strength, your speed, your fury, and your joy, unceasing thunder and eternal foam? And who commanded, and the silence came, here let the billows stiffen and have rest? Turning for contrast to the glaciers, which he apostrophizes in the next line. Ye ice falls, ye that from the mountain's brow adorn enormous ravines, slope amain, torrents, methinks, that heard a mighty voice, and stopped at once amid their maddest plunge. Motionless torrents, silent cataracts, who made you glorious as the gates of heaven beneath the keen full moon, who bade the sun clothe you with rainbows, who, with living flowers of loveliest blue, spread garlands at your feet. God, let the torrents, like a shout of nations, answer, and let the ice plains echo, God. God, sing ye meadow streams with gladsome voice, ye pine groves with your soft and soul-like sounds. And they too have a voice, yon piles of snow, and in their perilous fall shall thunder, God. Ye living flowers that skirt the eternal frost, ye wild goats sporting round the eagle's nest, ye eagles, playmates of the mountain storm, ye lightnings, the dread arrows of the clouds, ye signs and wonders of the element, utter forth God, and fill the hills with praise. Thou too, hoar mount, with thy sky-pointing peaks, oft from whose, antecedent, peaks, feet the avalanche unheard shoots downward, glittering through the pure serene, into the depth of clouds that veil thy breast. Thou too again, stupendous mountain, thou that as I raise my head a while bowed low in adoration, upward from thy base, slow travelling with dim eyes suffused with tears, solemnly seemest, like a vapory cloud, to rise before me. Rise, O ever rise. Rise like a cloud of incense from the earth, thou kingly spirit throned among the hills. Thou dread ambassador from earth to heaven, great hierarch, tell thou the silent sky, and tell the stars, and tell yon rising sun. Earth with her 1,000 voices praises God. Here is one little poem I think most valuable both from its fullness of meaning and the form, as clear as condensed, in which that is embodied. On an infant, which died before baptism. Be, rather than be called a child of God, death whispered. With assenting nod, its head upon its mother's breast, the baby bowed without demur. Of the kingdom of the blessed, possessor, not inheritor. Next, the Father let me place the gifted son, Heartily Coleridge. Next, the Father let me place the gifted son, Heartily Coleridge. He was born in 1796 and died in 1849. Strange, wayward, and in one respect faulty, as his life was, his poetry, strange and exceedingly wayward too, is often very lovely. The following sonnet is all I can find room for. She loved much. She sat and wept beside his feet. The weight of sin oppressed her heart, for all the blame and the poor malice of the worldly shame to her was past, extinct, and out of date. Only the sin remained, the leprous state. She would be melted by the heat of love, by fires far fiercer than are blown to prove, and purge the silver or adulterate. She sat and wept, and with her untressed hair still wiped the feet she was so blessed to touch. And he wiped off the soiling of despair from her sweet soul, because she loved so much. I am a sinner full of doubts and fears. Make me a humble thing of love and tears. End of section 25. Section 26 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kristen Hand. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Chapter 22. The Fervour of the Implicit. Insight of the Heart. The late Dean Milman, born in 1791, best known by his very valuable labors in history, may be taken as representing a class of writers in whom the poetic fire is ever on the point, and only on the point, of breaking into a flame. His composition is admirable, refined, scholarly, sometimes rich and even gorgeous in expression, yet lacking that radiance of the unutterable to which the loftiest words owe their grandest power. Perhaps the best representative of his style is the hymn on the Incarnation in his dramatic poem, The Fall of Jerusalem. But as an extract, it is tolerably known. I prefer giving one from his few hymns for church service. 18th Sunday after Trinity. When God came down from heaven, the living God, what signs and wonders marked his stately way? Brake out the winds in music where he trod? Shone o'er the heavens a brighter, softer day? The dumb began to speak, the blind to see, and the lame leaped, and pain and paleness fled. The mourner's sunken eye grew bright with glee, and from the tomb awoke the wondering dead. When God went back to heaven, the living God, rode he the heavens upon a fiery car, waved seraph wings along his glorious road, stood still to wonder each bright wandering star. Upon the cross he hung and bowed his head, and prayed for them that smote and them that cursed. And drop by drop his slow life blood was shed, and his last hour of suffering was his worst. The Christian Year of the Reverend John Keble, born in 1800, is perhaps better known in England than any other work of similar church character. I must confess I have never been able to enter into the enthusiasm of its admirers. Excellent both in regard of their literary and religious merits, true in feeling and thorough in finish, the poems always remind me of Berlin work in iron, hard and delicate. Here is a portion of one of the best of them. St. Matthew. Ye hermits blessed, ye holy maids, the nearest heaven on earth, who talk with God in shadowy glades, free from rude care and mirth. To whom some viewless teacher brings the secret lore of rural things, the moral of each fleeting cloud and gale, the whispers from above that haunt the twilight vale. Say, when in pity ye have gazed upon the wreathed smoke afar, that o'er some town like mist upraised hung hiding sun and star. Then as ye turned your weary eye to the green earth and open sky, were ye not fain to doubt how faith could dwell amid that dreary glare in this world's citadel? But love's a flower that will not die for lack of leafy screen, and Christian hope can cheer the eye that ne'er saw vernal green. Then be ye sure that love can bless even in this crowded loneliness, where ever-moving myriads seem to say, Go, thou art not to us, nor we to thee, away. There are in this loud stunning tide of human care and crime, with whom the melodies abide of the everlasting chime, who carry music in their heart through dusky lane and wrangling mart, plying their daily task with busier feet, because their secret souls a holy strain repeat. There are here some indications of that strong reaction of the present century toward ancient forms of church life. This reaction seems to me a further consequence of that admiration of power of which I have spoken. For finding the progress of discovery in the laws of nature constantly bring an assurance most satisfactory to the intellect, men begin to demand a similar assurance in other matters, and whatever department of human thought could not be subjected to experiment or did not admit of logical proof began to be regarded with suspicion. The highest realms of human thought, where indeed only grand conviction, and that the result not of research but of obedience to the voice within, can be had, came to be by such regarded as regions where, no scientific assurance being procurable, it was only to his loss that a man should go wandering. The whole affair was unworthy of him. And if there be no guide of humanity but the intellect, and nothing worthy of its regard but what that intellect can isolate and describe in the forms peculiar to its operations, that is, if a man has relations to nothing beyond his definition, is not a creature of the immeasurable, then these men are right. But there have appeared along with them other thinkers who could not thus be satisfied, men who had in their souls a hunger which the neatest laws of nature could not content, who could not live on chemistry or mathematics or even on geology without the primal law of their many dim-dawning wonders, that is, the being, if such there might be, who thought their laws first and then embodied them in the world of aeonian growth. These indeed seek law likewise, but a perfect law, a law they can believe perfect beyond the comprehension of powers of whose imperfection they are too painfully conscious. They feel in their highest moments a helplessness that drives them to search after some power with a heart deeper than his power, who cares for the troubled creatures he has made. But still under the influence of that faithless hunger for intellectual certainty, they look about and divide into two parties. Both would gladly receive the reported revelation in Jesus, the one if they could have evidence enough from without, the other if they could only get rid of the difficulties it raises within. I am aware that I distinguish in the mass, and that both sides would be found more or less influenced by the same difficulties, but more and less, and therefore thus classified by the driving predominance. Those of the one party, then, finding no proof to be had but in that testimony, and anxious to have all they can, delighting too in a certain holy wilfulness of intellectual self-immolation, accept the testimony in the mass and become Roman Catholics. Nor is it difficult to see how they then find rest. It is not the dogma, but the contact with Christ, the truth, with Christ the man, which the dogma, in pacifying the troubles of the intellect, if only by a soporific, has aided them in reaching, that gives them peace. It is the truth itself that makes them free. The worshippers of science will themselves allow that when they cannot gain observations enough to satisfy them upon any point in which a law of nature is involved, they must, if possible, institute experiments. I say therefore to those whose observation has not satisfied them concerning the phenomenon Christianity, where is your experiment? Why do you not thus try the utterance claiming to be the law of life? Call it a hypothesis and experiment upon it. Carry into practice, well justified of your conscience, the words which the man spoke, for therein, he says himself, lies the possibility of your acceptance of his mission. And if, after reasonable time thus spent, you are not yet convinced enough to give testimony, I will not annoy you by saying to facts, but to conviction, I think neither will you be ready to abandon the continuous experiment. These Roman Catholics have thus met with Jesus, come into personal contact with him, by the doing of what he tells us, and by nothing else. Are they blessed? What if their theories show to me like a burning of the temple and a looking for the God in the ashes? They know in whom they have believed, and if some of us think we have a more excellent way, we shall be blessed indeed if the result be no less excellent than in such men as Faber, Newman, and Aubrey de Vere. No man needs to be afraid that to speak the truth concerning such will hasten the dominance of alien and oppressive powers. The truth is free, and to be just is to be strong. Should the time come again when liberty is in danger, those who have defended the truth even in her adversaries, if such there be, will be found the readiest to draw the sword for her, and hating not, yet smite for the liberty to do even them justice. To give the justice we claim for ourselves is, if there be a Christ, the law of Christ, to obey which is eternally better than truest theory. I should like to give many of the hymns of Dr. Faber. Some of them are grand, and others very lovely, and some, of course, to my mind, considerably repulsive. He seems to me to go wrong nowhere in originating. He produces nothing unworthy except when he reproduces what he never could have entertained, but for the pressure of acknowledged authority. Even such things, however, he has enclosed in pearls, as the oyster its incommoding sand grains. His hymn on the greatness of God is profound. That on the will of God is very wise. That to the God of my childhood is full of quite womanly tenderness. All are most simple in speech, reminding us in this respect of John Mason. In him, no doubt, as in all of his class, we find traces of that sentimentalism in the use of epithets, small words as distinguished from homely, applied to great things, of which I have spoken more than once. But criticism is not to be indulged in the reception of great gifts, of such a gift as this, for instance. The eternity of God. O Lord, my heart is sick of this everlasting change, and life runs tediously quick through its unresting race and varied range. Change finds no likeness to itself in thee, and wakes no echo in thy mute eternity. Dear Lord, my heart is sick of this perpetual lapsing time, so slow in grief, in joy so quick, yet ever casting shadows so sublime. Time of all creatures is least like to thee, and yet it is our share of thine eternity. O change and time are storms for lives so thin and frail as ours, for change the work of grace deforms, with love that soils and help that overpowers. And time is strong, and like some chafing sea, it seems to fret the shores of thine eternity. Weak, weak, forever weak, we cannot hold what we possess. Youth cannot find, age will not seek. O weakness is the heart's worst weariness. But weakest hearts can lift their thoughts to thee. It makes us strong to think of thine eternity. Thou hadst no youth, great God, an unbeginning end thou art. Thy glory in itself abode, and still abides in its own tranquil heart. No age can heap its outward years on thee. Dear God, thou art thyself thine own eternity. Without an end or bound, thy life lies all spread in light. Our lives feel thy life all around, making our weakness strong, our darkness bright. Yet it is neither wilderness nor sea, but the calm gladness of a full eternity. O thou art very great to set thyself so far above, but we partake of thine estate, established in thy strength and in thy love. That love hath made eternal room for me, in the sweet vastness of its own eternity. O thou art very meek to overshade thy creatures thus. Thy grandeur is the shade we seek. To be eternal is thy use to us. Ah, blessed God, what joy it is to me to lose all thought of self in thine eternity. Self-wearied Lord, I come, for I have lived my life too fast. Now that years bring me nearer home, grace must be slowly used to make it last. When my heart beats too quick, I think of thee, and of the leisure of thy long eternity. Farewell, vain joys of earth, farewell, all love that is not his. Dear God, be thou my only mirth, thy majesty my single timid bliss. O in the bosom of eternity, thou dost not weary of thyself, nor we of thee. How easily his words flow, even when he is saying the deepest things. The poem is full of the elements of the finest mystical metaphysics, and yet there is no effort in their expression. The tendency to find God beyond, rather than in, our daily human conditions is discernible, but only as a tendency. What a pity that the sects are so slow to become acquainted with the grand best in each other. I do not find in Dr. Newman either a depth nor precision equal to that of Dr. Faber. His earlier poems indicate a less healthy condition of mind. His Dream of Gerontius is, however, a finer, as more ambitious poem than any of Faber's. In my judgment, there are weak passages in it, with others of real grandeur. But I am perfectly aware of the difficulty, almost impossibility, of doing justice to men from some of whose forms of thought I am greatly repelled, who creep from the sunshine into every ruined archway, attracted by the brilliance with which the light from its loophole glows in its caverned gloom, and the hope of discovering within it the first steps of a stair winding up into the blue heaven. I apologize for the unavoidable rudeness of a critic who would fain be honest if he might, and I humbly thank all such as Dr. Newman, whose verses, revealing their saintship, make us long to be holier men. Of his, as of Faber's, I have room for no more than one. It was written off Sardinia. Desolation. O say not thou art left of God, because his tokens in the sky thou canst not read. This earth he trod, to teach thee he was ever nigh. He sees beneath the fig tree green, Nathaniel Khan his sacred lore. Shouldst thou thy chamber seek, unseen, he enters through the unopened door. And when thou liest by slumber bound, outwearied in the Christian fight, in glory girt with saints around, he stands above thee through the night. When friends to Emmaus bend their course, he joins, although he holds their eyes. Or shouldst thou feel some fever's force, he takes thy hand, he bids thee rise. Or on a voyage when calms prevail, and prison thee upon the sea, he walks the waves, he wings the sail, the shore is gained, and thou art free. Sir Aubrey de Vere is a poet profound in feeling, and gracefully tender in utterance. I give one short poem and one sonnet. Reality. Love thy God, and love him only, and thy breast will ne'er be lonely. In that one great spirit meet all things mighty, grave, and sweet. Vainly strives the soul to mingle with a being of our kind. Vainly hearts with hearts are twined, for the deepest still is single. An impalpable resistance holds like nature's still at distance. Mortal, love that Holy One, or dwell for aye alone. I respond most heartily to the last 2 lines, but I venture to add, with regard to the preceding 6, love that Holy One, and the impalpable resistance will vanish. For when thou seest him enter to sup with thy neighbor, thou wilt love that neighbor as thyself. Sonnet. Ye praise the humble, of the meek ye say, happy they live among their lowly bowers, the mountains and the mountain storms are ours. Thus self-deceivers, filled with pride alway, reluctant homage to the good ye pay, mingled with scorn like poison sucked from flowers. Revere the humble, godlike are their powers, no mendicants for praise of men are they. The child who prays in faith, thy will be done, is blended with that will supreme which moves a wilderness of worlds by thought untrod. He shares the starry scepter and the throne. The man who as himself his neighbor loves, looks down on all things with the eyes of God. It is a fancy that in the midst of all this devotion and lovely thought, I hear that mingled mournful tone of such as have cut off a right hand and plucked out a right eye, which had not caused them to offend. This is tenfold better than to have spread offending members, but the true Christian ambition is to fill the divine scheme of humanity, abridging nothing, ignoring nothing, denying nothing, calling nothing unclean, but burdening everything a thank offering in the flame of life upon the altar of absolute devotion to the Father and Savior of men. We must not throw away half his gifts, that we may carry the other half in both hands to his altar. But sacred fervor is confined to no sect. Here it is of the profoundest, and uttered with a homely tenderness equal to that of the earliest writers. Mrs. Browning, the princess of poets, was no partisan. If my work were mainly critical, I should feel bound to remark upon her false theory of English rhyme, and her use of strange words. That she is careless, too, in her general utterance, I cannot deny, but in idea she is noble, and in phrase magnificent. Some of her sonnets are worthy of being ranged with the best in our language, those of Milton and Wordsworth. Bereavement. When some beloveds, 'neath whose eyelids lay the sweet lights of my childhood, one by one, did leave me dark before the natural sun, and I astonied fell, and could not pray, a thought within me to myself did say, is God less God than thou art left undone? Rise, worship, bless him, in this sackcloth spun, as in that purple. But I answer, nay. What child his filial heart in words can loose, if he behold his tender father raise the hand that chastens sorely, can he choose but sob in silence with an upward gaze? And my great Father, thinking fit to bruise, discerns in speechless tears both prayer and praise. Comfort. Speak low to me, my Saviour, low and sweet, from out the hallelujahs, sweet and low, lest I should fear and fall and miss thee so, who art not missed by any that entreat. Speak to me as to Mary at thy feet, and if no precious gums my hands bestow, let my tear drops like amber while I go in reach of thy divinest voice complete. In humanest affection, thus, in sooth, to lose the sense of losing. As a child whose songbird seeks the wood for evermore, is sung into its stead by mother's mouth, till sinking on her breath love reconciled, He sleeps the faster that he wept before. Gladly would I next give myself to the exposition of several poems of her husband, Robert Browning, especially the Christmas Eve and Easter Day, in the first of which he sets forth in marvelous rhymes the necessity both for widest sympathy with the varied forms of Christianity and for individual choice in regard to communion. In the latter, what it is to choose the world and lose the life. But this would take many pages and would be inconsistent with the plan of my book. When I have given two precious stanzas, most wise as well as most lyrical and lovely, from the poems of our honored Charles Kingsley, I shall turn to the other of the classes into which the devout thinkers of the day have divided. A Farewell. My fairest child, I have no song to give you. No lark could pipe to skies so dull and gray. Yet ere we part one lesson I can leave you for every day. Be good, sweet maid, and let who will be clever. Do noble things, not dream them all day long. And so make life, death, and that vast forever one grand, sweet song. Surely these last, who have not accepted tradition in the Mass, who believe that we must, as our Lord demanded of the Jews, of our own selves judge what is right, because therein his Spirit works with our spirit, worship the truth not less devotedly than they who rejoice in holy tyranny over their intellects. End of section 26.
Section 27 of England's Antiphon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. England's Antiphon by George MacDonald. Chapter 23. The Questioning Fervour. And now I turn to the other class, that which, while the former has fled to tradition for refuge from doubt, sets its face towards the spiritual East, and in prayer and sorrow and hope looks for a dawn, the noble band of reverent doubters, as unlike those of the last century who scoffed as those of the present who pass on the other side. They too would know, but they know enough already to know further that it is from the hills and not from the mines their aid must come. They know that a perfect intellectual proof would leave them doubting all the same, that their high questions cannot be answered to the intellect alone, for their whole nature is the questioner, that the answers can only come as questioners, and their questions grow towards them. Hence, growing hope, blossoming ever and anon into the white flower of confidence, is their answer as yet. Their hope, the beatific vision, the happy-making sight, as Milton renders the word of the mystics. It is strange how gentle a certain large class of the priesthood will be with those who, believing there is a God, find it hard to trust him, and how fierce with those who, unable, from the lack of harmony around and in them, to say they are sure there is a God, would yet, could they find him, trust him indeed. Ah, but, answer such of the clergy and their followers, you want a God of your own making. Certainly, the doubters reply, we do not want a God of your making. That would be to turn the universe into a hell, and you into its torturing demons. We want a God like that man whose name is so often on your lips, but whose spirit you understand so little, so like him that he shall be the bread of life to all our hunger, not that hunger only, already satisfied in you, who take the limit of your present consciousness for that of the race, and say, this is all the world needs. We know the bitterness of our own hearts, and your incapacity for intermeddling with its joy. We have another mountain range from whence bursteth a sun unutterably bright. nor for us only, but for you also, who will not have the truth except it come to you in a system authorized of man. I have attributed a general utterance to these men, widely different from each other as I know they are. Here is a voice from one of them, Arthur Hugh Clough, who died in 1861, well beloved. It follows upon two fine poems called The Questioning Spirit and Bethesda, in which is represented the condition of many of the finest minds of the present century. Let us receive it as spoken by one of the foremost ranks of these doubters, men reviled by their brethren, who dare not doubt for fear of offending the God to whom they attribute their own jealousy. But God is assuredly pleased with those who will neither lie for him, quench their dim vision of himself, nor count that his mind which they would despise in a man of his making. Across the sea, along the shore, in numbers more and evermore, from lonely hut and busy town, the valley through, the mountain down. What was it ye went out to see, ye silly folk of Galilee? The reed that in the wind doth shake, the weed that washes in the lake, the reeds that waver, the weeds that float, a young man preaching in a boat? What was it ye went out to hear, by sea and land from far and near? A teacher? Rather seek the feet of those who sit in Moses' seat. Go humbly seek and bow to them, far off in great Jerusalem. From them that in her courts ye saw, her perfect doctors of the law. What is it came ye here to note? A young man preaching in a boat. A prophet! Boys and women weak declare or cease to rave. Whence is it he hath learned to speak? Say, who his doctrine gave? A prophet? Prophet, wherefore he of all in Israel tribes? He teacheth with authority, and not as do the scribes. Here is another from one who will not be offended if I class him with this school, the finest of critics as one of the most finished of poets, Matthew Arnold. Only my reader must remember that of none of my poets am I free to choose that which is most characteristic. I have the scope of my volume to restrain me. The good shepherd with the kid. He saves the sheep, the goats he doth not save. So rang Tertullian's sentence on the side of that unpitying Phrygian sect which cried, him can no fount of fresh forgiveness lave, whose sins once washed by the baptismal wave. So spake the fierce Tertullian, but she sighed, the infant church. Of love she felt the tide stream on her from her Lord's yet recent grave. And then she smiled, and in the catacombs, with eyes suffused but heart inspired true, on those walls subterranean, where she hid her head in ignominy, death, and tombs, she her good shepherd's hasty image drew, and on his shoulders not a lamb, a kid. Of these writers, Tennyson is the foremost. He has written the poem of the hoping doubters, the poem of our age, the grand minor organ fugue of In Memoriam. It is the cry of the bereaved psyche into the dark infinite after the vanished love. His friend is nowhere in his sight, and God is silent. Death, God's final compulsion to prayer, in its dread, its gloom, its utter stillness, its apparent nothingness urges the cry. Moanings over the dead are mingled with profoundest questions of philosophy, the signs of nature, and the story of Jesus, while now and then the star of the morning, bright phosphor, flashes a few rays through the shifting, cloudy dark. And if the sun has not arisen on the close of the book, yet the aurora of the coming dawn gives light enough to make the onward journey possible and hopeful. Who dares say that he walks in the full light, that the counsels of God are to him not a matter of faith, but of vision? Bewildered in the perplexities of nature's enigmas, and driven by an awful pain of need, Tennyson betakes himself to the God of nature thus. 54. The wish, that of the living whole, no life may fail beyond the grave, derives it not from what we have, the likest God within the soul? Are God and nature then at strife, that nature lends such evil dreams, so careful of the type she seems, so careless of the single life, that I, considering everywhere her secret meaning in her deeds, and finding that of 50 seeds she often brings but one to bear, I falter where I firmly trod, and falling with my weight of cares upon the great world's altar stairs that slope through darkness up to God, I stretch lame hands of faith and grope, and gather dust and chaff, and call to what I feel is Lord of all, and faintly trust the larger hope. Once more, this is how he uses the gospel tale. Mary has returned home from the sepulchre, with Lazarus so late its prey, and her sister and Jesus. 32. Her eyes are homes of silent prayer, nor other thought her mind admits, but he was dead, and there he sits, and he that brought him back is there. Then one deep love doth supersede all other, when her ardent gaze roves from the living brother's face, and rests upon the life indeed. All subtle thought, all curious fears, borne down by gladness so complete, she bows, she bathes the Saviour's feet, with costly spikenard and with tears. Thrice blessed, whose lives are faithful prayers, whose loves in higher love endure. What souls possess themselves so pure? Or is their blessedness like theirs? I have thus traced, how slightly, the course of the religious poetry of England, from simple song, lovingly regardful of sacred story and legend, through the chant of philosophy, to the full-toned lyric of adoration. I have shown how the stream sinks in the sands of an evil taste, generated by the worship of power and knowledge, and that a new growth of the love of nature, beauty counteracting, not contradicting science, has led it by a fair channel back to the simplicities of faith in some, and to a holy questioning in others, the one class having for its faith, the other for its hope, that the heart of the Father is a heart like ours, a heart that will receive into its noon the song that ascends from the twilighted hearts of his children. Gladly would I have prayed for the voices of many more of the singers of our country's psalms. Especially do I regret the arrival of the hour because of the voices of living men and women. But the time is over and gone. The twilight has already embrowned the gray glooms of the cathedral arches, and is driving us forth to part at the door. But the singers will yet sing on to him that hath ears to hear. When he returns to seek them, the shadowy door will open to his touch. The long-drawn aisles receding will guide his eye to the carven choir, and there they will stand, the sweet singers, content to repeat ancient psalm and new song to the prayer of the humblest whose heart would join in England's Antiphon. The end. End section 27. Read by Kerry Adams, your book voice, at Mesa, Arizona, on the 29th of March, 2022. End of England's Antiphon by George MacDonald.